Welcome to Around the Corner, a podcast about leadership and organizational performance. I'm Ayana James.
And I'm Megan Liu. Welcome to Season 1, where we talk with 9 future-focused leaders and dig into their stories and perspective, as well as wisdom about driving change and leading into the future. At STRAAD, we believe that leadership is the engine of performance, and our work creates the pathways to make that possible.
Conversations like this podcast help shape our own work with leaders, and we are excited to share with you. Perhaps you'll be challenged or take away an insight that enriches your own leadership journey. Welcome to Around the Corner.
Our guest today, Vicky Li, has more than 25 years of experience as a senior executive across the energy industry. She has led at scale across geographies and through transformation, always returning to a simple truth: clarity is kind.
For Vicky, performance means strategic clarity, accountability, and results. Leadership means acting with intention and purpose, and above all, developing others. She has consistently created the conditions for people to find their voice, take risk, and grow into new opportunities, even when the path forward was ambiguous.
Her story is one of saying yes to unexpected opportunities, breaking barriers, and practicing leadership in some of the most complex enterprise environments, where alignment, high-performance teaming, and change leadership are tested every day.
This conversation is an invitation to think differently about what it takes to lead with clarity and conviction, and to build organizations where inclusion, courage, and accountability drive results. Let's step into the conversation.
Vicky, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. As you know, we start each of these podcasts by having our guests share their definitions of some of the core words to our collective work: leadership, performance, and potential. So we'd love you to give us your take on each one of those words.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Megan and Ayana, for having me here today. When I think about leadership, I think about a couple of things. I think about intentional action, and I really think about leading with purpose. We can talk a little bit more about what that looks like later on the conversation here. When I think about performance, I think about 2 concepts. I think about strategic clarity, and I really think about driving results. Obviously, you have to be able to deliver in order to have performance. And probably coupled in that is really, the thought of accountability. And when I think about potential, I think about both the traditional version of potential, which is really around development. And I really then think about ambiguity. And I say ambiguity in the sense of as you move through in your own personal leadership journey, and I'd say even as you're thinking about your own development, a lot of the times we're dealing with ambiguity. You're not going to know all the answers. You're not going to know necessarily, you're not going to be that technical expert anymore. And so dealing with ambiguity is really important, I would say, as you think about potential of a person in an organization or even through yourself.
Yeah, awesome. I'm excited for this conversation ahead. Thank you.
Okay, Vicky, it's so good to be in conversation with you and to know a little bit of your story. Every leader tells their story, their career journey a little bit differently. Why don't you take us back? And we'd love to hear not only about the story, but about some key inflection points and transitions along the way as well.
Sure. Well, I think as you guys both know, I've been kind of at this for a little while. So I'm, a senior executive. I have over 25 years of experience both in the energy and resource industry. I've lived all across the country and have had an opportunity to really work through North America and a little bit into Latin America, both as a business leader as well as an HR professional. When I think about different inflection points in my career, it's really probably coupled with a couple of things: saying yes to strange and wild and wacky opportunities that you don't really think come along the way. But, sometimes you get these great leaders in your own personal journey who say, hey, I think you should try this really cool thing. And, within that, I went from being HR, and I don't have an HR background. I actually have a business background, but joined an organization where they said, hey, come and try and be a great new grad. through to, okay, you'll start your career in HR, which was so fun, and you're going through reorganizations and really cool, energizing change. Um, Through to, hey, why don't you go into the business and be a professional once you've reorganized a sales and marketing organization? Why don't you go try your hand at it? And I think it really is when you talk about those moments that matter, it is, I said a little bit earlier around dealing with that ambiguity is sometimes those things that scare you really help to grow you. And even when you
Hmm.
don't think something is possible, taking that risk and knowing that you're going to be resourceful enough to figure out the answers is kind of the right way to go. And then transitioning into leadership. So, I've talked a little bit about performance and you're delivering all those great results and being that good expert over time. And then you sort of figure out, hey, you really like working with people and you can do this in a different way. And, leadership is maybe something that you are interested in and you see a lot of great leadership over a career and you can see a lot of things that you want to do differently or things that you really loved in leadership over time. So, um, yeah, when I think about the moments that matter through my own career progression from being, in HR into the business, doing, some business strategy in there to leading like large scale development change. Those are probably some of the things I would say I never thought that I don't think I aspired to necessarily be a specific something over time. And so you kind of grow into these really unique experiences. And I think everybody has their own, personal journey, but a lot of that is about saying yes and taking risks.
Hmm. Vicky, where does that come from for you? We hear, I mean, it sounds like you're talking about confidence, a sense of bravery, a sense of resilience. Is that something that has matured in you over time? Is that something that you came into the world with? What's
Yeah,
the source of that?
I would say I've had great leaders I've worked for over time who've
Yeah.
said, "Hey, I think you should really try this thing." And that has led me to really work in situations where you have a lot of that ambiguity. I would say I don't know that the confidence is necessarily inherent, but I had these great leaders who said, "Hey, I think you can do this really cool thing, and we'll do it in a way that is completely no risk to you. So if you don't like it, go back to doing what you're doing. But we really think now is the right time to try the thing." So, when I was in HR, it was like, "Hey, why don't you go work in the plant?" And I'm like, "Ooh, I don't really have a background in labor relations, and I'm not really sure." At that point, we'd gone through a labor disruption. So I think you go through these things, you're like, "Oh, okay, that is probably not a super comfortable thing, but you can get through it." And so every time you build a bit of resilience into these experiences and they turn out
Mhm.
well, um,
Mhm.
you kind of I do think you gain more confidence over time to be like, "You know what? I may not have all the answers, but I will figure it out." And I think
Mhm.
we've all experienced this. I don't know anybody who hasn't, but that imposter syndrome, I think, follows us through every stage of our career.
Mhm.
And I think the more you have the proof points and are really surrounding yourself with people who are like, "You've got this," or that people are going to help. I think even when I transitioned from an HR professional into field sales, I'd gone from being the person supporting the client to being in the client group. But I had great relationships with, a lot of the business, and they were really good for saying, "Hey, like, I'll show you the ropes." And so having that along the way has also really, I'd say, been incredibly impactful. I think no matter what, you have these great teams along the way, and I think people generally really want to see other people succeed. And I think the more you can foster that in an organization or with your peer group, like I think anything is really possible. And I do find when I develop other people, I love to do the same for others. And so when you kind of see that in yourself and you see that in how you grow and develop other people, um, trying things that aren't necessarily the norm. I'd say when I moved out to Western Canada and led our lubricants business out here, like that industry really has no women. And so bringing women into this organization, having them go out to meet customers, like I think there were a lot of folks at the time who say, "Hey, like that's just not how it's done." And I think there's also, once you have that experience of breaking barriers, you're also more open to breaking those barriers for others.
Yeah, the word momentum comes to mind, right? Building momentum. And I love so much of what you said. Like, get started, take a first step, make it additive. And I can already hear in you, Vicky, that beautiful sense that leaders grow other leaders. You identify opportunities, you invite people in and create the conditions where they can safely risk. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fabulous. Coming out of that, uh, c- sorry, do you want to lean in, Megan?
Sorry. Yeah. Vicky, the other piece that I hear in you is I think what often gets talked about as mentorship and sponsorship. Just talk to us about, those two concepts as you've navigated.
Yeah, like so if I'm going to be super honest, my passion when I thought I was going to start working because I really loved business. I was like, and I love candy, as both of you might know. I'm like, hey, I thought like my dream job would have been, category manager of confection, going to like candy shows, filling out our retail stations. Like I thought that that was actually going to be like my ideal everything when you think about an organization and what work brings you energy, what a passion you have. Like, and so, I do think what's really great in, at least to the organization I worked in, succession planning is incredibly important, right? So you want to be able to think about who are going to be those next set of leaders in an organization. I would say I love doing that too, where you think about what is your next move, what are the next moves after that. So that planful development, and you think about it's not necessarily a job, but I'd say it's those experiences that are really helpful. Like earlier on in your career, you really want to learn as much as you can about the business, any business. Like we say, it doesn't even matter. Just learn as much as you can about the business and the organization and think about how it works. That helps you think about the system. So as you think about, your more specific jobs that you'll do, like the more technical roles in there, then you kind of understand how those jobs fit into the rest of the organization and how it impacts others. So you start to think about the system of it. You can move into typically leadership or some form of strategy role. And that is that bigger, broader aspect to it. And within that, I'd say, Megan, like what I think I've really loved over time is I've had leaders who are really thoughtful about what are those great next steps? It doesn't necessarily have to be a position, but they've been really, really purposeful or intentional about saying, here's the skill set or the thing that we want you to learn in this role. It's maybe not necessarily about being the expert at it, but we want to see that you can do this in a way where you aren't the expert, you don't know the thing, but you can figure your way through it and be able to perform and deliver. Um, and that sense of accountability, I feel like, has kind of held me through probably my whole career of wanting to, um, deliver an outcome of some sort and have the accountability to really drive something. And so it's
Beautiful.
taken, I think, both, like really, like I'd say, even as I had a family, that's where I think a lot of this mentorship came into play, where you think, like, how are you going to do this? How are you going to manage this career that you've really been driving for with these humans that you're also trying to really build and mold into? And then you get these great sponsors in there that really help you make it happen. And so I do think it requires a mix of both that mentorship, the person you can lean on for advice, and then the true sponsorship for the people who actually help you make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Vicky, because I think those two words are often used, talked a lot about. And yet, as you said, with us knowing you so well for as long as we have, we've watched you, both receive mentorship and sponsorship and now, do that to your next generation of leaders that you're growing. So yeah, thanks for leaning in.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Ayana?
Okay, Vicky, we really want to get into this construct of performance, what it takes, what it is. Megan and I and STRAAD as an organization have a perspective that we engage our clients with that, centers around three key buckets around gaining strategic clarity, leaning into strategies for high performance execution, and ensuring that there are the right indicators and signals in a learning and performance culture to like keep that machine moving, if you will. Um, we have heard you say often, clarity is king, clarity is queen. When you think about strategic clarity, let's unpack that concept a little. what it is for you, what you've come to know about it, and how we get after it.
Yeah, it's funny. It's such a big concept, right? Like when you say that to any leader in an organization, you're like, clarity is king. And I think a lot of times it's like, what does that mean? It can mean anything from, hey, like I'm trying to prioritize something. A leader will get a great idea about something in an organization and they're like, this is the way I need to do it. And so I really say, and working with both STRAAD or working within the business as a strategic partner, a lot of the time what you're really trying to suss out in that is what is the problem you're trying to solve for? And I've worked with great leaders who've really, really been good at driving that. And it's hard because you're thinking about solving the one thing. And I think what leaders often sometimes forget about is, okay, but how does that one thing impact a broader thing? And so whether it is, hey, we're trying to fix, let's say, like as an example, like a process, like mining process, or you're trying to think about how you fix regulatory. Well, those things don't often come together unless you're looking at legal, unless you're looking at environment, unless you're looking at, reporting, sustainability. So a lot of that in an organization really is as you're thinking about driving clarity and trying to get that clarity is like, what is the problem you're trying to solve for? Why this? Why now? And I think a lot of leaders tend to try to solve a piece of the puzzle, and that sometimes is the right thing for the right moment. I think a lot of the
Mm,
times what we've always tried to do also is to think about, okay, so how does that then also impact the system of things? And I probably will give another example of, hey, lots of organizations right now are trying to change the system to implement different technologies. They need to go, they want to go quickly, they want to get in there and go really fast. Um, and you have to really think about is the organization, like when you think about organizational readiness in that maybe gets into high performance. I'm probably melding them into high performance execution, but are the conditions right? So you sometimes need to go slow to go fast. Um, like I think about a technology implementation. I'm like, we've done it before and processes weren't really mapped. And you're like, don't worry, the technology will take care of it. And it can be okay, but it doesn't come without pain. And so it's either pain in the, hey, our processes aren't adjusted to the new technology. The other pain, if you do it the other way, is, hey, this is taking so long because you want to map all the processes and make sure the technology fits. And so either way in the organization, decisions will get made, but really trying to figure out that intent, the problem you're trying to solve for and what you're trying to achieve is really helpful. And I think both from a leadership perspective, um, an organizational perspective, because I think a lot of times organizations and lots of organizations that I'm talking to now, they really struggle with the number of priorities they have and what is the most important thing and then why now.
yeah. Vicky, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about the dynamic of being an individual leader, trying to do their own work of distillation, getting clarity and prioritization. And what if you learn about doing that with others? The process of collaboratively moving toward getting that kind of clarity.
Yeah, I think like stakeholder engagement is incredibly important in this, right? So I think in the work that you do, both as a consultant and those of us that do this work internally in organization, really trying to understand how this fits within a broader context is really challenging in some cases, but also incredibly important. And so when I think about what you're saying in that, Ayana, it is understanding all the stakeholders involved, figuring out how you can influence along the way, either to shift or change or to really gain clarity on a problem you're trying to solve for. And I think the reality is a lot of times when, companies like STRAAD or internal, strategic partners come into play, you're really working with a client group, and that client group is trying to drive their one intention or purpose. And so making sure that you have really good stakeholder engagement. And it's not just about managing the change, but a lot of times organizations and your teams are trying to really figure out like why this, why now? And how is this going to help solve something or at least lead to a better outcome that helps you deliver a business strategy or an outcome that's going on right now? And a lot of it for organizations today are really around change, technology, cost, and running really efficiently. So, yeah, those are probably what I would. Does that answer your question?
And Vicky, do you see what you just said, your last comment, which makes me think about like people having an understanding of how they fit into the bigger system? Do you see that as the secret sauce, the foundation toward high performance execution? Like, is that what's the necessary inputs?
Yeah, like here's maybe what I would say. I think it depends on how big. And when I say big, I mean, if it's within your boundary of control. Like I think about a reorg or a transformation we did within a specific part of a business. Um, and it really just had to do with like the midstream organization. So they're really trying to figure out how they become better aligned, more profitable, more integrated. I don't know that the rest of the organization doesn't necessarily need to know all the ins and outs. It's just you're fixing that kind of one part so that the whole becomes a lot better. I think when you're talking something large like a technology implementation, like an SAP, that's something that touches every part of the organization. And the reality is, finance really can't work without human resources, without legal, without. So when you think about a shared function piece, and then when you think about it going and then out to the business, those things that are almost the backbone of a company require a lot more concentrated effort, focus. And so when I say that it depends, I think, on the context. And it depends on
That makes a
scale.
lot of sense. Yeah,
Yeah,
scope and interdependencies, scale.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
For sure. As you have executed at scale over your tenure as a senior exec, what is it that you hold as foundational just to ensure great high performance execution, whether working with small teams or scaling that across the enterprise?
Yeah, I go back to kind of what we've just talked about. Like, I think what has worked, what hasn't worked is those who work in a silo. So I think when you have, we've done tracks of work and leaders are like, hey, if I just solve this one thing, everything else will be
Mhm.
fixed. And I think, large organizations, that is difficult for. Because oftentimes we talk about that interdependency, that systems thinking that's really required as you become more senior in an organization. And so, where I've seen things or problems not get solved for, I'd say that's probably lesson number one. Lesson number two is when you have too many priorities. So I think this is tough too when an organization is trying to change and not necessarily understanding what their intention of what they're trying to change for. You tend to get it because of market pressure. So it's a cost thing, it's a performance thing.
Mhm.
And when you have a lot of parts of a company that are trying to change at the same time, it's not just necessarily about change fatigue, but it really is then managing priorities and folks really it's creating confusion around how things work and how things fit and what is the order has come. Where I've seen it be really successful is really creating that common purpose or common goal and within that then the organization all kind of hums and understands why they're doing it. So I do think there is a beauty to fewer things done well. I do think there's a beauty to having an order where it's, hey, that's the right thing, but it may not be the right now. And that does
Mhm.
create better focus in an organization. Um, and I also understand in a lot of times, like sometimes it's just a point in time. So some leaders need to fix the thing for that part of the organization for now. And really being clear whether it's an organizational challenge, is it a leadership challenge, is it a skill set or capability or competency challenge, are all, I think, intertwined in that success factor or a lens that I would
Mhm.
say leaders need to consider when they're evaluating what is the problem you're trying to solve for.
It requires so much thinking,
It does, and it's
sophisticated leadership,
yeah,
right?
like there's a beauty to knowing how the relationship and the system of it works. Like
Mhm.
I've seen that in spades. And there's also a beauty to not trying to make things too complicated, right? So You don't necessarily need to boil the ocean, but that is really the tough line that all of us are kind of interweaving, right? Every
Mhm.
leader in an organization, I think, has an idea of what success looks like or what it could be, and having those interrelationships to be able to suss out or ask those right questions that you guys do so well whenever we have to partner. There's a beauty to kind of getting under the hood of something. And at the same time, you're not going to be able to solve everything and have all the answers. So that ambiguity does come into play. It's like, what is the right solution potentially for right now? Um, that will help move an organization through for this particular point in time.
Vicky, what would you say? What have you learned about one of the core components of a culture that allows for that kind of beauty to emerge, that kind of sophistication, that kind of awareness, that kind of willingness to lean in and take the time to get to the root problem, ask the better questions. How do you articulate, speak to what that culture is and how you grow that?
That's a really good big question. I do think having really clear alignment at the top, like I've seen multiple
Mhm.
iterations of that. I think probably the most successful I've seen it is an executive who's really clear on, focusing on the few things that they know are going to move the organization through, really creating that platform or intention for, you know, what's going really well, what needs to change within the organization that needs to happen differently, shifting that accountability to all employees in an organization to say, look, if all of you see something that doesn't make sense, ask that right question. And really, I would say, like, having that, how would I say this? I'm trying to use this, but using like that fast fail, I do think has been really, really helpful over time, right? So, we probably get into a bit of that learning culture that you described earlier, but I think I've lived organizations where we have punished failure, whether it's in safety incidents, whether it is in projects, whether it is like we were really
Mhm.
quick to just terminate. And then you get an organization from a culture perspective that really is just compliant. They're just going to do what a leader says. And that I think is tough. If you can move to this right balance of you've got clear direction in an organization, um, and you allow for that curiosity and growth and you learn to for lack of a better term, fail fast. But I think what we all need to recognize, and you see it, I'd say, in a lot of like IT organizations, right? Like mistakes, mistakes are going to happen. They're not all going to lead to catastrophic failure, but mistakes will happen. And it's really about creating that environment where you're going to learn. In other cases, in other parts of the organization, standard repeatable is great. And I've lived in an organization where you get a lot of that maturity processes flow, but you sometimes get stagnant in terms of, an external something that comes into play. I think like COVID is a great example of that. COVID turned a ton of things on its head. And so organizations' ability to move through and learn really quickly through, hybrid, through technology, through a secure cybersecurity attack, through all of those things, building that resiliency and ambiguity in the organization and that kind of skill set's also really, really helpful when I think about what makes organizations really successful.
Vicky, in your assessment, is anything missing out of the buckets that I position at the top, strategic clarity, high performance execution, and moving toward a learning and performance culture? Is there anything else, connective tissue, that you've learned, seen deploy in your leadership?
I think the tough part in this is, and maybe it's more drawing on the thread of organizations are inherently complex, right? There are these
Hmm.
organisms,
Yeah.
and not everybody is going to know everything that's going on in an organization. Where you get, I think, a good, strong leadership team that has really good line of sight clarity, metrics, performance, and kind of an openness to growth or thought. Um, it is nice to see, and it probably gets into like this inclusion conversation that we get into, but having that ability for an organization to challenge openly, debate, versus command and control, in the context of
Mm-hmm.
leadership, I think is, I don't know if I'd call it the secret sauce, but I think leadership is never just a title, right? Like people really follow character, they follow credibility. That's really kind of this whole concept of trust in there. I think organizations that are, folks are really just head down doing whatever their leader wants and don't really bring to the table, I have a great idea. I really am thinking about this, because they're worried about that getting shot down all the time. Is this probably nuance in any organization or leadership or concept that is, I think, it ebbs and flows in an organization over time, but it's an interesting culture element when you describe that or ask that question. That's probably what comes to mind when I think of that. Like it is that balance of, you want clarity of direction in an organization, but you still want enough flexibility that an organization can start to move and change and grow, or be agile enough to deal with external or even internal challenges that you face. I think when you lose followership in an organization, and it just becomes kind of like, I'm here to just do my job, and you lose that kind of extra effort, that ability to really have a high performing or high execution, or that type of an organization, it tough becomes tough because
Mm-hmm.
you've kind of lost the hearts and minds. So you start to see that, like, I think of how you measure that. Like, you start to see attrition happening. You start to see it in specific groups. You start to see it in, some of your big talent is leaving for, um, greater sense of purpose, choice, growth, because
Mm-hmm.
what they're experiencing isn't great for them anymore. So yeah, those are probably some lagging indicators in there, but the leading indicator is really, I think, that ability for organizations to provide a little bit of that flex in there of like, hey, we're going to give you great work. You're going to achieve really great things, and we're still going to let you fail fast, learn from your mistakes, and be able to challenge the status quo so that the organization can get better.
Yeah, it puts a smile on my face because it's so dynamic and nuanced and sophisticated, right? I also can hear, I think, why you thought this when you opened and you said this is getting to the world of inclusion, because that sense of, is there room for my voice, room for my agency, right?
Yeah.
Even within the helpful constraints that are
Yeah.
required for organizational life. And I think Megan and I, the work that we do, consistently see this competency that's required across all levels of an organization to facilitate constructive conversation,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
in the intimacy of the one-on-one or the team conversations, that's where you're practicing all that you just described within
And
the
it is,
constraints.
and it's
Yeah.
interesting, right? Like, I think we've experienced this in the times that we've worked together in different engagements
Mm.
is, I think you guys have really been good at respectfully challenging, you know, folks on our teams within our organization to be able to say, okay, like, have that voice. And it's part of finding your voice at the table, right? And if you don't have it, it's like, how do you get that confidence? So you talked about earlier to do it. Sometimes it's giving the person permission to show up differently. There was an individual I had mentored in my last organization, and we only had a few conversations. And, she was a manager at the time, and she felt like she should really be in a support role, and it really just took a conversation around, like, why? Like, why do you feel like you just need to be the support? You're this great technical expert. You have all this, unique perspective in there. And it was really, a moment of like, I want to encourage you in this next meeting to like do the one thing where you are saying what's on your mind and you're thinking about it. And they were really nervous to do it. So it's that muscle that you're trying to, it's a workout. You're trying to practice that. And then she gets into another big meeting. We have a conversation before she's with, the executive team for her part of the business. And she's like, okay, in this meeting, like, I'm going to do this. You set that bit of a goal and practice that muscle of creating that voice for yourself.
Mm.
And, she's recently been promoted to director. So it's been really exciting to see where, um, there are so many people in an organization that have a really good, smart, strong voice. And you want to be able to, as a leader, she like wasn't in my team or anything like that. She was just in a different part of the business. But pushing people sometimes to really do that thing that's out
Mhm.
of their comfort zone, similar to what I've experienced in my career. And it's just fun to see those voices start to pull through an organization. And you're like, look, this is a person who's incredibly competent, really, really thoughtful in their approach, and you want to see more of that. And so sometimes giving people permission to have that voice at that table, or helping them formulate that clarity to be able to have that voice, can be incredibly
Hmm.
impactful. Yeah.
Yeah, you just have done a lovely job of giving, I think, your thesis on development, right? Yeah, thesis on development, how to come alongside and support. Okay. Vicky, we thought we would talk a little bit about, in your executive role, the fact that you do and have worked with strategic partners outside of the organization.
Mhm.
Okay, let's transition there.
Mhm. Vicky, you have dropped hints along this conversation. We've had the fortune of being able to work with you for many years now. And so wondering if we can, as Ayana said, pull on the notion of strategic partnership from an HR standpoint and strategic partnership with externals. So maybe if we start with internally, what have you noticed about the evolution of strategic partnerships from an HR standpoint? Where have you seen that done well? What are your own lessons learned? Just thinking about our audience, those listening are likely, trying to ensure that their HR organization is more strategic. What do you know about that? What do you think it's important?
Yeah, I think there's probably a great sweet spot in all organizations where you really do have a core group of folks who are kind of those internal consultants. They're the person that you're testing your thoughts and ideas with. They're individuals who typically have multiple experiences across multiple parts of the business. So, generally, the business grows up in a certain line, whether you are, I came from the energy industry. So whether you are upstream, downstream, or support the functions, you tend to historically stay in those lanes. I was probably a really weird experiment where you're both in a function, plus you spend time in the business, and then you go back into the functions. But having that broad kind of set of experiences. So I'd say strategic partners tend to also work with multiple client groups across the company. So you get a greater interaction or understanding of how the broader business works and functions. So I think, from an internal strategic partner standpoint, there's a real benefit to be able to support executives in the organization to help them think through a bit of that systems thinking that we talked about, like how will that impact others? What's the right process? How would you flow through it? So you've got that internal safe space. Where we've loved partnering with an organization like STRAAD is um, sometimes, a lot of companies deal with all the big houses out there, but they come with an army. They tend to execute the thing. They bring all their process, and there's a place for that. I think where we've really enjoyed kind of the boutique nature of something like a Strat is really the ability to tailor the offering. So it's, sometimes it's a skill set or competency blend that you're trying to get, where we've really worked with you to help support development of even our own team members who may not have that experience. Is a lot of operating models in HR have shifted over time. That skill set hasn't always been there, and so there's been a beauty to that. I think for a long time I've experienced both OE and change professionals in addition to being business partners, and there's a great marriage to that business partner who's traditionally run all of your cycles. They know the people, they know the culture, they know all the in-depth elements of that, but they may not have that org effectiveness, high performing organizational change transformation experience. And so I think we've really leveraged an organization like STRAAD to be able to help support development. We've also used, an organization like yourself to really help tailor to a specific business challenge. So it's maybe not necessarily these big, massive ERP changes or something significant like a big enterprise transformation, but you know, tailored experiences or business projects, I think, have been incredibly impactful to be able to have an organization that helps support that specific initiative in there. And I think, you guys have a really neat offering and lots of experience across different industries. And that probably then leads me to the third piece around, sometimes when you're in it yourself all the time, I had 25 years within an organization, more than 25 years within a specific organization. You see different parts, but you don't necessarily experience other organizations. And so being able to leverage the knowledge and experience of a third party who's like, hey, like this is interesting, but here's what's worked somewhere else, because you're not always out there talking to your peer group. Like I have experienced that in the last number of years where I'm like, you're so busy doing the thing. Sometimes you're just like, okay, it's great to phone a friend and be like, okay, here's what's going on. Like, what have you seen be successful and what has worked? And in some cases, that could take, you doing your own research can take you a really long time versus, being able to phone a friend at a company like STRAAD and saying, okay, I need some help. And this is really what's going on. And I think sussing out, is it a leadership challenge? It's like that great sounding board. Um, and having that external perspective, it really gets to that concept of that curiosity, right? So how can you ask a lot of really great questions, use all the resources you have to really flesh out like what is the problem I'm trying to solve for and what really would help.
Mhm. Well, I love that opportunity for a branding play, Vicky. Strad, your strategic friend.
Phone a friend. Yeah, exactly.
Phone a friend.
Yeah,
Because so much at the heart of it is to do that kind of thinking, even as you were describing what that secret sauce is, a performance around inclusion, relationships, if there is trust, right? If you know that someone's got your back and there's a shared perspective on the methodology, let's get to root cause. What problem are we trying to solve? It opens up these generative spaces, and we've delighted being able to do that with you and others that you've worked with. And because so much of it, I think, is about turning on that next level of thinking possibility, imagining what might be. And that enthusiasm, engenders a real sense of collaborative, we can get after something together. All voices
exactly.
are welcome.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
I think like, I kind of reflect on the experiences that we've had, and it's been numerous, but it's been this really interesting intersection of, even I'd say you guys challenging us to say, okay, is it truly like a reorg that's required? Because look, any structure can really work. Um,
Hmm.
and is it the people? Is it a leadership dynamic? Is it a process issue? So like being able to also test all the multifaceted versions of like, okay, what am I trying to solve for? I think it might be this, but ooh, you've got some interesting team dynamics in there. Maybe we need to focus a little bit on the team dynamics, because if the team dynamics were solved, maybe the process would actually continue to just work. And so there's some interesting, I'd say, experiences that we've had in even our engagements that have
Yeah.
been really fun mixes of, okay, let's do team dynamic, let's do team health, let's do more team stand up, let's do, um, you know, a complex restructuring, a transformation. So there's a really neat spectrum, I would say, of experiences. Again, not everybody in an organization has that experience, and you don't have time when there's 30 or 40 of these going on that are all really important things that are going to help an organization. Sometimes you do need to lean on a third party to be able to say, okay, I need your help with this. Help me diagnose or understand X, Y, or Z. Help me come up with a few options in there. All of that, when you talk about engagement and stakeholder management, is really key and important, and relationship is critical in that. Um, but yeah, the I think a lot of people, maybe this is kind of gets back to your last question about some things that are missing, like organization health is a critical part of that too, right? Team dynamic is a critical part of that. Um,
Mhm.
you don't like not everybody gets along in an organization, or they can work better and differently. And so, when we think about the internal strategic partnering, it's really helping um, the organization to suss out those things in a really hopefully safe way. And then in other cases, it's really then about helping to build that team, change that dynamic, help the folks understand their own self journey and how they impact others to be able to really impact like a greater outcome for the organization. So,
Oh, it just lights us up to be thinking about this and putting all of this into action. And Vicky, in the complexity of leading this in this very sophisticated way, let's travel a little bit to your own sense of personal practices. Is that okay? I'm going there. Yeah. Let's turn to your own sense of personal practices, the things that keep you grounded, keep you human in this dynamic work. What are you willing to share about what you've learned and about what has worked for you?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Ayana. So, we talked about like generally like clarity is king is really, I think, something that I really hold dear to. So it's a lot about, organizations are complex. You're spending a lot of time especially in this profession in HR, dealing with ambiguity. And every organization is maturing in a different way. So organizations I talk to now, some of them are at the very early stages of like, hey, I don't have clarity of my own KPIs. I need numbers to be able to get that. And then once you have that information, it's okay, what are you going to do with all that great information? And then you're dealing with, you talked a little bit earlier on like team dynamics that support some of that. And so there is this whole system that I think I've learned over time, like it's never always just about the one thing. That's probably a symptom of a greater problem. I think in some cases, organizations are like, oh, that's really complicated. I don't want to deal with it. But I think a lot of the fun that we have in this work is problem solving and trying to be able to help unlock something to create a better, different outcome for the organizations that we work with. And maybe the learning for me and a bunch of that is like, why does that matter now? Because, it could have changed 5 years ago, it could change 2 years ago, it could change right now. So there's a bit of timing, I think, that comes within that. So that's probably one that I hold dear in terms of how I love to approach things. It's like, okay, what are we trying to do and why? And I will ask probably a million questions in that. I think maybe the other lesson I hold dear over time is leadership isn't about you. And so I've seen really good ebbs and flows in organization about that, but I really hold true to this whole idea of like leadership is really about developing others. So I think we never underestimate the impact that we should never underestimate the impact that we have on others, whether you are an individual contributor or whether you're a leader in the organization. And so the ability to, help others grow and develop and see things that aren't possible in themselves is something that I've really valued in my career over time. And I love doing that for others. And so, I really kind of hold true to this notion that, your influence is multiplied when you develop or sponsor growth in other people. And so when we
Mhm.
talk a little bit about your own personal sponsorship or mentorship or how you think about developing the organization, I think it's all of our responsibilities to grow and develop everybody in an organization. And then you multiply that ability to, really achieve success.
Mhm.
Um, Maybe my third would say, systems thinking is really important. So it kind of probably gets to a bit more of the, like organizations and working in an organization is not an individual sport. You really need to think about how your actions will impact other leaders in the organization. I have seen where, metrics and performance and recognition have really rewarded teams being at odds with one another. So, valuing one person's success or one group's success over another. And I've lived in the consequences of that when I was in the field.
Mhm.
And, the performance of another business is really impacting your ability to actually drive and deliver results. And then I've seen this other flip side of like, hey, I have this interesting idea, but I'm going to talk to different parts of the organization because I think it impacts them. And you do get to these way better solutions at the end of the day. And it can just
Definitely.
be like one or two, engagements or conversations to be like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. But do you have any thoughts around like, would that work? Does that break something in your organization? Just those like little interactions in that, thinking about the system are really helpful. They probably take slightly longer, but are probably will drive a better outcome at the end of the day. So if I were to probably summarize probably the key things that I kind of hold true to myself, it's probably those three. Clarity is king, leadership is not about you, and then, really think about the system of it all and how your choice will impact others.
Mm-hmm.
Vicky, let
Wisdom.
me try a question out of left field or might feel, but building on this notion of being grounded. You and I were in a shared space once where a really wise leader was at a dinner table and asked us the question, what is it that's feeding your soul right now in leadership? And I think that question is something that's lingered with you over the past several years.
Yeah.
How 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 does that question work its way into your sense of being grounded as a leader, or sifting and sorting, developing others? What does it get at?
Yeah, like I think the leaders I've really connected with over time, like and
Hmm.
there's also we've also been in this shared space too where somebody had said leadership, there's no place for ego in leadership, right? And I think that has stuck with me for almost a decade now, just hearing those words because I think about my worst experiences with some leaders, and it's really been all about ego, where it's been driving for their own self, driving, and that's been hard when you think about what work feeds your soul, because that feels like you're doing work in service of a person versus in service of the success of an organization. And so I think I have probably struggled in those circumstances where it's like, man, this isn't really about you. Like you need to start thinking about a broader group of people, this,
Yeah.
collective. And I think where organizations work really well and you feel the most energy of having impact is when you're all like organizations can all be doing separate things, but they're all doing it in service of a
Mhm.
greater goal. And even the tough situations, like I'd say, we've seen it in this industry, even like a decade of layoffs is really hard, but you can do it in a way that is still helpful to the individuals who are leaving and honor the people that are leaving an organization and knowing that
Mhm.
they do really good work and they're really good human beings. And knowing that you're doing it in service of if the greater good of the organization can still remain and be performing and et cetera. Like those are good things. And you can still, it's really hard
Mhm.
work, but it can be still really good things. And so those are probably like, that is what I hold true. I think, the tough part is when you are working with leaders and it's all about their own ego and it's all about them individually versus really working through this impactful nature of you're trying to all go after delivering a big project that's really going to be really helpful for an organization or in some cases you're really helping a team dynamic get more healthy or stood up really properly and you're getting to know those individuals and have that relationship and you can help unlock those things in a company. Those are, yeah, when I think about even this next phase of what I'm trying to do, like that's kind of that impact. Like that's the work that at least brings me energy in there. I know as we've worked together over the years,
Mhm.
that's where really like being able to unlock those fun things where you see the success of others is really fun. And that's where I'd say
Yeah.
that's kind of the impact. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's core to your why. Because saying yes to the mantle of leadership, you've got to be in tune with your why for that. What the real driver is. And I hear
yeah.
I hear that clarity in you, Vicky, which is beautiful to experience. Why don't we go there where you just took us? We've done a lovely look back. We've talked about the system in the room, sophistication, complexity, and beauty in it. Let's turn the corner. Let's look around the corner. Share with us a little about what's piquing your curiosity in terms of your next leadership contribution, ambition. What are you trying to get after next?
I am looking for a different impact in an organization. So I think,
Mm.
um, I'm not really sure necessarily what that's going to look like just yet in the sense of, I know what really brings me energy, and the experience I'm looking for is to have that voice at the table, to be able to have a good, build that relationship or really think about solving a great problem, right? So I think, I've had these conversations over time with a lot of people. I'm like, yeah, that is probably the work. Like, I do like problem solving. And at the end of the day, there's so much complexity going on in organizations right now. They're kind of ripe in the change, whether you're facing AI, whether you're, thinking about how you stay in business, whether you think about growth, whether you think about retrenching, whether you think about survival, like those are all kind of universal themes that I'm experiencing as I'm talking to different organizations right now. And every organization's at a different level of maturity. And so I think what's interesting for me right now is everybody feels like they're behind in some way versus, oh, maybe you're exactly where you need to be. And maybe this is really then about how do we shape this organization to be able to, move in their journey to the next best, whatever this organization is going to be. And so, I think I'm talking to some folks, some leaders are like, oh my gosh, I need a wholesale transformation to, oh, I'm going to do some tweaks to really improve some of this to, hey, I'm thinking about ways of working differently. And, the organization is very mature and they're really set in their ways. And so I'm like, all of those, when I think about the next phase of everything, I'm like, ooh, they're all really cool problems to solve for. And others are in this whole like, oh my gosh, I have to make sure that AI isn't going to, like, what are the impacts of AI? How can I use it to help my business? What will it mean for this employee base? What skill sets do I need to create? So, yeah, there's lots of richness, I'd say, out there in organizations. And in some cases, I'm like, ooh, we've seen this. We've seen this in evolutions of most companies that we've worked with out there. So, yeah, having that ability to, you know, be at the table, being able to influence in the right way to be able to drive, a good, smart outcome for an organizations is what's next. And I don't know, I'm not really set on size or industry or anything like that, but really I'm thinking about that impact. And when you talk about what feeds my soul, I'm like, yeah, that's probably the work that I would say is really going to feed my soul going forward here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Celebrating that with you and for you.
Vicky, we spend lots of time thinking about the future of leaders, the future of leadership. As Ayana warmed us up to the concept around the corner, what do you think some of the competencies are necessary? What are you encouraging leaders to think about, bring with them into the future?
That's a great question. It's probably, I don't know, maybe I think about this in three different ways. I think about leadership like for yourself as sort of how you grow. We've talked a little bit about that curiosity and making sure that you continually um, are testing your own or questioning, what's around you and being able to grow and learn. And I say that in a sense of most leaders grow in an organization because they are subject matter experts, like they're really technical in nature. They're not necessarily leaders. And then they lead through um, a really good crisis, and they've done really well at delivering this specific thing. And as you grow as a leader, we talked a little bit about ambiguity. We talked a lot about complexity in an organization. I think the reality, at least when I work with leaders, is you're actually not expected to have all the answers. You're really there to think about how you are guiding, directing, like leading a team of people to deliver an outcome. And then your role then shifts to being, how are you developing others to grow? How are you thinking about competencies and skill sets that are required for this future state? How do you want people to develop in that? So a lot of this is, we think about leadership not being about ego and leadership not being about you. It's really then about your role shifts to being this great technical business expert to growing and developing other people to be these great things. And so it is a tough shift, I think, for leaders to um, not think about what's in it for themselves and think about what's in it for other people. So, and like not everybody can get there, but it's I think the secret sauce of where it's gone really well. Our leaders who really test their ideas or thoughts or get input from others in the organization. So that's probably, I'd say, that sense of self is kind of, you have to get over you. The other thing I think that kind of when I see is coming around the corner, like staying connected to what's going on in both the like internal to an organization, but what might impact the organization externally. is that, and not getting overwhelmed by like, what will AI do? What will this like, and it's what practically can an organization. So the things that you can control, like
Mhm.
manage costs are things that you can generally control in an organization, creating clarity, setting direction, like, thinking about prioritization. Those are things that I think are really good foundational basics in an organization that leaders can naturally pull from. And at the same time, like flexing this skill set of complexity. And I think the easiest way though is to really test ideas and test thinking. And I think a lot of leaders are scared to not have all the answers. But I think, we've done this with, you guys over time. We've done it with, others, but it's like and being out there in community or in industry to be like, okay, like we're experiencing this and everybody's like, oh, we're doing the same thing. And oh, like, well, how are you guys thinking about it? So this bouncing of collective ideas, I think, is also going to be a really helpful thing for leaders to do. And it's hard because there's usually so much going on in your own organization that you don't necessarily feel like there's time to be able to test that, or you're trying to go to these big industry things where they can articulate the problem, but it's hard to really understand what it's going to mean. That like bridging that, I think, as a leader, is going to be a unique skill that I think is definitely coming around the corner. For folks, because I don't know that a AI chat GPT will necessarily be able to say, hey, help me solve the complexity of this in my organization, because a lot of that is leveraging your own knowledge and then leveraging the knowledge of others to be able to come up with what could potentially work right now.
It's great to hear your insight, Vicky, because we're seeing that so much in terms of use your vocabulary, choice of language, the skill set of translation, the skill set of application, the skill set of distilling insight, right? And then trying a thing on.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because there's a deluge of ideas, and if you put yourself into the ecosystems where you can bounce off, you're going to hear some great ones. But then being able to bridge, your verb was to bridge it, right, and bring it in.
Yeah. And then, we talk a little bit about that relationship and influence in there. It's like if you don't have a voice in an organization, even as leader, so people, for whatever perceive you in a certain way, like it's hard to get that through an organization to be able to be like, oh, I can see this thing that's coming at you. And here's what I think we should do, or hey, maybe we should talk about this upcoming impending, risk to the organization. At least having that voice to bring it to the table so you can have a collective conversation would be incredibly impactful and powerful. And so the willingness or the appetite of an organization to be able to have that, like culturally, is a really interesting, I think, concept of maturity in a company. I'm talking to a lot of companies right now who are like, you know what, I don't have a lot of really strong leaders. Like they're used to doing what they're doing and they don't have necessarily that mindset of testing the status quo. And so I do see and hear a lot of organizations right now who want to make a bit of that shift because they want fresh ideas, new thinking, or they want folks who've been there, done that to be able to help influence their organizations that may not have experienced that. So you kind of have to get ready for change. Change is inevitable in every organization. And I think a lot of that dealing with complexity and ambiguity right now is really enabling leaders or helping leaders to figure out how to lead through a change, maneuver through a change, support their teams through a change. And there is a real skill set to that as well. And I'd say lots of organizations have change fatigue because it's like, man, it's just been, I think, one thing after
Nonstop.
another. And it's hard. You're like, I just want to get this great work done. And you're dealing with like a crisis, you're dealing with a cyber attack, you're dealing with an operational issue, you're dealing with, financial challenges. So it's hard to create focus in that. I'd say it is tough for a lot of leaders out there to navigate today.
Vicky, this is just Ayana's curiosity, not being a parent, a biological parent to anyone. What would your boys say leadership is? Like, what are they seeing in the world? What are they picking up? What are the signals they're paying attention to?
Oh gosh, it's going to be interesting because I think, well, I wasn't prepared for this one.
Yeah,
What are they doing?
just you
Like
and I talking here.
pause. It's funny where I think they have a lot less appetite for the structure of anything. right? So I think about like if it doesn't suit them, they will find something else to do that is more like, I don't know that they are chasing the thing. Like they all want to live well, they want to have a great lifestyle, but I think right now they're chasing that connection with others. It is that purpose meaningful. My older one's got a summer job right now, and it's been an interesting meld of he's like, oh, I'm just on the shop floor, and I'm like, you're working for this really cool organization that is like in sustainability. They're doing carbon capture in construction materials, like having to bridge that idea of like he's actually doing something that's really going to be great for the world. Like
Mhm.
less materials, quicker construction. I'm like, you're working for a really good, sustainable organization that's actually going to be better for the environment someday. And we actually had this conversation at the dinner table. So when I think about what he's looking for,
Mhm.
he's like, well, the work itself is cool to understand what to do. Then they are interested in, okay, but like, how does it work? And like, what is it good for? And so they kind of quickly move to not just wanting to do the task, but wanting to understand the connection of the task to something else and what that means. Yeah. So it's been an interesting bridge experience, I would say, of trying to like, and it's probably actually true in any organization when you're first starting out, you kind of do your role, you kind of go in day in, day out, like you probably don't necessarily understand how your work connects to a bigger picture. That is the role of leadership,
Mhm.
I guess, to really think through and be able to translate for everybody what their work means to a bigger outcome. So yeah, I don't know what they're looking for, Anna. Like we say today, I've got one going off to university this fall, and I'm like, the job that you want is probably doesn't exist today. Just like when I went to university, like it's when the internet was
Mhm.
starting, and that was the one thing my mom said to me, what is the internet and are you going to be able to find a job? And,
Mhm.
at the time we were working with companies around like, okay, where would you put Wi-Fi? What would be the benefits to like, humanity with Wi-Fi? I'm like, my kids would die without Wi-Fi today. So yeah, with like, we'll see where AI goes, but I do really believe like, he wants to go into law. I'm like, oh, I'm so curious to see what will change in that.
Change.
Like
Yeah.
so much can
Yeah.
change. So.
I do spend some mental energy thinking about, given the complexity, the skill set, the diverse skill set, the sophistication of leadership. I do spend some time thinking about the professionalization of it. Like
Mm,
if we were preparing people for the vocation, the career, the contribution of being leaders, not industry, right?
yeah,
Not what I'm doing. As you have said, as you move up the ladder of impactful leadership, it becomes more and more ambiguous, right? Less technical expertise, more ambiguity. How might we? Is there an around the corner possibility that we might move into an era where we professionalize leadership with enough clarity that a 17-year-old out of Calgary might say, I want to be a leader when I grow up. Is that
yeah,
something that we would aspire to? Is that
yeah,
something that we would equip our young people for? I don't know. Future yet to be seen.
yeah. And here's this, I'd say, like, and the skill in this is figuring out how, like, at the end of the day, I think no matter what role I've done, like, every organization is really about human connection, relationship, and people.
Hmm.
So I think
Yes.
about when I think about my role in sales, I'm like, people buy from people. That's how they make decisions. Do
Hmm.
they trust you? Do they think your price is right? The product is going to work for me? Are you technically competent enough? Like there is something there about even a leader. I'm like your ability to like people don't follow a title. People follow your credibility. People follow your ability to build and develop them and this connection you have. I think if
Hmm.
you're a very transactional leader in this, like while you can be really technically strong in there and people might follow you because you're smart, that only gets you so far. And so I do think like um, it's an interesting around the corner of, no matter what will hold you true in every role that you ever do is your ability to connect with people. It's how you get influence. It's how you impact others. It's how you grow and develop them. It's how you build trust. Like there's so much of that my heart would say, if we could truly build leaders to really build connection, whether that's empathy, psychological safety, trust, like it's, lack of ego. There's so much of in there, that, and it's not necessarily, I think people are go, oh, that's like the soft stuff of leadership and but you're like, no, those are the people that really help inspire. Yes, you have to deliver results at the end of the day. Like you have to create clarity. Like those are you have to be accountable. Like those things are all
Mhm.
true. And then this other part of like connection with leaders. And if you think about leaders you've all worked with before, like those are the ones that you want to work harder for. Those are the ones that you will like go 24/7 to the bat for all day, every day, because you get that sense of purpose, belonging, connection with somebody who is like, hey, I'm invested in you and the outcome and the success of you. I'm not just in it for me. And so, yeah, we can figure out how to bottle that up and create that in another, the global planet. That would be, um, the world would be a different place. Very altruistic, maybe
Right.
I'm thinking, but
And and if we can figure out how to start that earlier in the value chain, right? Um, you know, yeah, they come into the world, I think, with some of that readiness. We coach it out of them, continue to
yeah.
infuse it
You
into
think you
them
have to
and us
behave a certain
collectively.
way to be a leader. And you're
Yeah.
like, actually, that's not true. Like we talked earlier around authenticity. I'm like, that's true. I'm like, what you see is what you get. I don't necessarily know that I behave differently in a boardroom than I do with my individual team. And there are some people who turn it on for that and turn it off. And I feel like that gets really exhausting. And so that, having folks value that authenticity of who you are, so you can be who you are, at any level of the organization. Yeah, like if we could get the world to believe that, think that, value that, that would be exceptional.
Right. Well, oh,
Yeah.
well, that's lovely. Vicky, is there anything that you wanted to say that you haven't said yet? We'd love to make room for that. Insights that you have?
Um, Maybe the last final thought that I would say is like, leaders aren't supposed to know everything, and you can't know everything. And I think a lot of
Right.
times we feel like we have to have it, we've got to get it. I think the beauty to being able to partner and phone a friend, in the industry, in the organization, or external to the organization, is really knowing that you can actually get help through others to be able to solve a complex problem. And so, the thing or the fallacy I think we all feel as you move through an organization is like, okay, I've got to prove that I can do this and that I can think through this. And um, I think the real openness is knowing when you can't do all the things and you're not going to necessarily deliver all the things because you're one of many. That's really, I think, the other true test of leadership is to be able to know when you're going to need help. And that's a tough place to be sometimes. And at the same time, you probably will produce a better outcome at the end of the day when you can get the help you need.
You heard it here on Around the Corner Conversations with STRAAD, and today with Vicky Li. Vicky, it's been a delight, such a joy to be with you in this conversation. We both, I know that both Megan and I have really enjoyed the friendship and the relationship and partnership with you and with your team, and the way that you are so intentional and purposeful in your desire to make impact and how you're living that out day after day. So thank you for the conversation and the time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, Megan, it's time for our debrief section of our podcast. We just came out of a powerful conversation with Vicky Li, who continues to be friend, client, colleague in this space of executive leadership. It seemed really clear that we just were in some kind of masterclass experience. Wouldn't you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a masterclass in how to lead strategic change, a masterclass in how to think about innovation, a masterclass in how to think about levels of leadership and as
Mm,
you're at key
yeah.
inflection points, what are the competency changes and focus changes?
a masterclass in her own knowing of how important psychological safety, risk-taking, debriefing, building a high trust culture is at the heart, the WD-40 of the organization, what makes it tick, or the secret sauce, in her words. A masterclass in, I think, one's ability to navigate a large enterprise over several CEOs, move with it, navigate with it, get from it all that she has learned and experimented and tried. For those listening, she has done a beautiful job of navigating large enterprise.
Yeah, it's absolutely lots of insights on world-class leadership that drives performance, and the both and reality of knowing her own story, her own narrative, her own guiding principles, right? We heard lots of them about voice, about strategy being king, about taking those strategic risks, but being brave when it's uncomfortable, and those being guiding posts next to a deep understanding of the levers of the organization and how to influence and how to engage with stakeholders collaboratively, honoring dignity and worthiness of all those, on multiple sides of said table, and doing that in a thoughtful way. The other thing that I thought was just so powerful was, as we were getting schooled in the best possible way, insights and content, right? I think we were also, in the richness of the conversation, experiencing the humanity of leadership with someone who was in process, even as we know so much and experience so much. And Vicky models so beautifully, taking forward from her past experiences. She's very much in process of her next becoming. And her leadership journey is just that, a journey, and hasn't stopped and will not stop. And so I really loved also the honesty that, as we watched her, I think, distill what matters now, and her own articulation at this moment that there's more impact to be had, her own strategic prioritization, that is what she wants to give her next contribution to in a leadership role, and to do that for the sake of and with developing others. We listened to, observed, had the privilege of being in conversation with someone who is definitely in a state of integration, taking forward the best, that masterclass content, and using that now to figure out their evolution and in an integrated way moving that forward. So a big thank you to Vicky for that. And to use some of her language, the permission that gives us as listeners, you and I in conversation with her, to keep on practicing, doing something well, understanding with her sophistication all that it takes, and continuing to be in process, and not stopping. So that's what I'm really taking away, is like a key insight from the conversation.
Yeah. One of my favorite questions that, you ask me, you ask our clients, you ask lots, is, to what will I lend my leadership? And, I think it's a brilliant way of capturing, her current state.
Yeah. Yeah is not a very sophisticated response. It's my soul being in tune with the power of that question, right? Like it's just resonating so deeply that actually is a profound question to ask of ourselves and to be in relationship with as leaders. It's a reframe on purpose to what will we give ourselves, and knowing that so intrinsic to being here on this experiment of life, on this planet, this moment that we have, is to do it with others and for the sake of others. Maybe that just gets my juices flowing, like my vibrations up, as I think about the why of leadership. Yeah, to what will you lend your leadership is such a great question.
So thanks, Vicky.
So thanks, Vicky. for that.
Thank you for joining us on Around the Corner, where strategic clarity and high-performing teams create the conditions for organizations to accelerate. If you found today's conversation meaningful, please follow the podcast and share it with others who are curious about the future of leadership and performance.